Can you believe that the Disney film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was released in 1937? That's a few years ago. That's 88 years ago. But don't trust me, I was never very good at maths. And it's still as much of a classic now as it was those 80-odd years ago. Don't you agree? And you may know that it's taken from a much older work, all the way back to 1812, when some of you lot were very young, of course. In Snow White, we are, of course, introduced to the characters. Of course, we've got Snow White herself, and of course, we have introduced quite soon in the seven dwarves. As well as Snow White, and as well as being introduced to the seven dwarves, we are introduced to the Queen. And the Queen has in her possession a magic mirror on the wall. And even if you've never seen Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or even if you've never read the book from 1812, or back from when you were young, I'm sure that you will have heard of the famous quote, which every day the Queen would look into the mirror and say. She would look into the mirror and she'd say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?" And you may, at a quiet moment when you're alone, before you go out of an evening, perhaps have yourselves found yourselves uttering those words into your own bathroom mirrors, hoping to get a response back from somebody, anybody. Of course, the magic mirror presents back to the Queen the response that she wants to hear. It paints a very particular picture of her reality. Indeed, what the Queen is doing in that moment as she finds herself before that magic mirror is looking to compare herself with everybody else. Because in that comparison with everybody else, she wants to be the best, or she's the fairest, or the most beautiful in the whole land. Her own self-worth, the foundation upon which her self-worth and her flourishing as an individual are all based on exterior factors, what everybody else is compared to her. And so as long as the magic mirror responds and says, "Well, Your Majesty, you are," and that's what we hope to hear back from the magic mirror in our bathrooms, don't we? Then we know that everything is okay. So when the Queen discovers that she isn't the fairest, she isn't the most beautiful, that actually that title was to go to another, Snow White, this is when problems ensued. This is where we get that great surge of jealousy that sort of appears, doesn't it, from the pit of your stomach. You get the surge of jealousy, that rage, and so that rage and that jealousy leads to where the Queen would seek to bring Snow White herself to a timely demise. We may look to the Queen and think to ourselves, well, how terrible, how evil of her. That's her name in the show, isn't it? The Evil Queen. And yet at some stage in our lives, all of us have fallen into the same trap as the Queen, where we see our flourishing in life, we see the advancement of our own faith journey, perhaps, or the quality of the commitment that we make, our own well-being even often, as being in a comparison against another. And so we begin to value ourselves not in the way in which God sees us, totally beautiful, totally unique in his eyes, but rather we see ourselves as a value against the other. We turn ourselves into objects, things to be objectified. And there is a real danger in this, because just as in the experience of the Queen in the film, that jealousy, that anger, that frustration, that rage against the other becomes a poison that impacts not only our spiritual growth, but ultimately plays out in other ways, and plays out in how it divides and breaks relationships. Today's gospel challenges us to take time, to take a step back, and to invest in our own growth. Listen to the challenge Jesus makes through those parables that we hear in that gospel. He says, "How can you say to your brother, 'Brother, let me take out the speck that is in your eye,' when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log that out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye." With the beginning of Lent biting at our ankles, this invitation to invest in our spiritual growth is timely and providential. As we get ready to enter into the desert with the Lord, and to begin to, perhaps over these next few days, consider what our Lenten journey is going to look like this year, let us make it our desire to pause, to take a step back, and make it our desire to begin to take those logs out of our own eyes. May the beginning of this Lenten journey, we be able to put aside those false comparisons which we make against our neighbours. Let us, as we enter the desert with the Lord, truly seek to see ourselves as God sees us, totally beautiful, totally unique in his eyes, with something special which we have to offer him. Lent becomes fruitful when we are able to put aside those things which just get in the way. And this could be that unhelpful magic mirror of comparison. As we begin then to see ourselves as God sees us, we will then be in a different place to be able to have those spiritual cataracts removed. So be able to see clearly those fruits which St. Luke reflects upon at the end of the Gospel when he says that the good person out of the good treasure of his heart produces good fruit. Because it's true, isn't it, that if we compare ourselves, if we measure ourselves against the other, we don't always recognize those gifts that are within us. And so if we don't recognize them, how can we use them? How can we give them away even for the building up of his kingdom? As we enter into the desert of Lent on Wednesday, please be assured of my thoughts and my prayers for you and your family. Amen.